kissed her forehead that morning. That was the part that broke her. Later, not the lipstick she didn't recognize on his collar, not the way his phone screen went dark the moment she walked the room, not even the lies he told with such easy, practiced calm that she'd almost believed them herself. It was the kiss. Tender. Deliberate. The kind of kiss a man gives a woman when he's already decided she'll never find out. Amara Rowe had spent 6 years loving a man the rest of Chicago was terrified of. She knew what it meant to stand in the shadow of Dante Valeri, the silences at restaurants when he walked in, the way grown men straightened their spines and looked at the floor, the phone calls that ended abruptly whenever she entered a room. She had accepted all of it, every armed escort, every canceled dinner. Every night she lay awake listening for the sound of his car in the driveway, telling herself that fear was just the price of loving someone like him. She had never once thought the thing she should have been afraid of was the way he smiled at her. 8 months pregnant, standing in an elevator that smelled like expensive cologne and old money, Amara pressed one hand against her stomach and thought about how much her feet hurt. She hadn't even been supposed to come. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And when you finish watching, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that elevator. The rain had started sometime around 8 that evening, the kind of slow Chicago rain that didn't announce itself, just arrived and settled in like it planned to stay a while. Amara had been sitting in the back of the car for 20 minutes, staring at her phone, rereading the text. Dante had sent 4 hours earlier. Running late, don't wait up. She had read it so many times the words had stopped looking like words. She kept turning her phone over in her hand, then turning it back, then setting it on the seats beside her and picking it up again. Her driver, Marco, hadn't said anything. He never said anything. That was probably why Dante kept him around. She'd asked Marco to take her home. And then, 2 blocks from the Pence building, she'd changed her mind. She told herself it was practical. Dante kept her prenatal records in his office safe. The backup copies her OB had insisted she carry into her 3rd trimester after a billing system error had lost her chart the month before. She needed to take those to her appointment in the morning. It was a reasonable, completely mundane errand. She told herself that at least 4 more times on the way up in the elevator. The building's lobby was nearly empty at that hour. 2 of Dante's men stood by the front desk men she'd seen dozens of times. Men who knew her face and knew better than to ask why the boss's pregnant wife was showing up unannounced at 9:30 at night. They nodded. She nodded back. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor and watched the doors close. The elevator ride took less than a minute. She was thinking about whether she wanted tea when the doors opened. The hallway leading to Dante's private floor office was lit the way it always was, low, deliberate, the kind of lighting that made everything look important. Amara stepped out slowly, one hand on the wall of the elevator for a moment because her center of gravity still surprised her sometimes, even 8 months in. She could hear voices. Dante's voice, low and close, and then a laugh. A woman's laugh, easy and unguarded. The laugh of someone who felt completely comfortable exactly where she was. Amara's feet stopped moving on their own. The office door was not fully closed. Through the gap, maybe 2 feet of it, she could see the edge of Dante's desk, the floor-to-soiling window behind it, with Chicago's nighttime skyline laid out like a painting, and Dante himself standing close enough to Serena Voss that their shadows merged on the wall. His hand was on her face, not her arm, not her shoulder. His hand was cupped against Serena's cheek the way he used to cup Amara's, tilting her face up the way man does when he's done with pretending and has decided to let himself want something openly. Amara stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. Later, she would not be able to say exactly what she felt in that moment. People always expected betrayal to feel like fire, white-hot, immediate, something that makes you want to shout or shatter or destroy. What she actually felt was more like the sound a room makes when a piece of furniture falls over. A single flat impact, and then silence where the furniture used to be. She became aware that her hand was flat against her stomach. Dante turned. He turned the way a man turns when something shifts in the room, some animal instinct that tells him the temperature has changed. His eyes found Amara in the hallway, and every muscle in his face did something she had never seen before. Not guilt exactly. Guilt was something you performed. This was different. This was the look of a man who had run a calculation and understood in one fraction of a second exactly how much he had just lost. Serena turned a moment later. She had the grace to step back. No one said anything. Amara's eyes moved to the desk. She had come for the prenatal records. They were sitting right there in a manila folder on the corner of the desk, exactly where she would have asked him to put them. The sight of that folder, so ordinary, so practical proof that she had genuinely come here for a reasonable and mundane errand, made something collapse quietly behind her sternum. She walked into the office. Her footsteps were steady. She didn't know how. She picked up the folder. She set it against her side, holding it with one arm the way she had to hold everything now, because her arms couldn't meet properly in front of her. Dante moved toward her. Amara, she held up one hand. Not threatening, not dramatic. Just a hand, palm out, the way you stop a conversation you're not ready to have. And something about its absolute calm stopped him completely. She looked at the ring on her left hand. She had worn it for 6 years. Dante had placed it there himself, with hands that weren't entirely steady, which had been the most surprising thing she had ever seen him do. Dante Valeri did not have unsteady hands. She had loved him for that detail more than she could properly explain. She slid the ring off. It came off easier than she expected, given how her fingers had been swelling these last weeks. She set it on the desk right beside the pen he always used, right beside the glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. She looked at him. "I'm tired, Dante." Her voice was quiet. Not broken, not trembling. Quiet the way deep water is quiet. "I don't want to fight for someone who already stopped fighting for me." And she walked back to the elevator. The ride down felt longer than the ride up. She stood with her back against the elevator wall, and her hand on her stomach and her folder of prenatal records against her side, and she breathed the way her midwife had taught her, slowly, deliberately, the breath reaching all the way down. She could feel the baby moving. Elodie had been active all day, pressing against Amara's ribs in that particular way that was somehow both uncomfortable and the most grounding thing in her life. "I know," she thought, in the direction of her own body. "I know." Marco was exactly where she'd left him, idling at the curb. He got out to open her door when he saw her coming. He had an umbrella, of course he did. He always had an umbrella. She ducked into the car, and he closed the door carefully behind her and got back in without a word. "Home," Amara said. "Yes, Mrs. Valeri." She turned her face toward the window and watched Chicago move past in the rain, and she did not cry. She thought about that for a long time afterward, the not crying. She wasn't numb. She wasn't in shock. She was completely terribly awake and present in her own body, feeling every mile of the drive home, and she simply didn't cry. She wasn't sure if that meant she was stronger than she'd thought, or if it meant something much worse that some part of her had already known. And the grief she'd expected to feel in that elevator had actually been unfolding in slow pieces for months. So quietly she'd mistaken it for pregnancy anxiety and hormones, and the ordinary fear of raising a daughter in a world like the one her husband had built. She thought about the morning, the kiss, the tender, deliberate, practiced kiss of a man who had already decided she'd never find out. She pressed her hand flat against the cool glass of the window. The mansion was dark except for the kitchen light when Marco pulled through the gate. The security team nodded as she passed 4 men on the night rotation. Men whose names she knew. Men who had carried her grocery bags and sat outside hospital waiting rooms. And never once, she thought, once asked her, what about the kind of work they did for her husband. She thanked one of them, which she always did, and he looked briefly surprised, which he always did. She went upstairs. She did not go to their bedroom. She went to the nursery instead. Dante's decorator had finished it, 3 weeks earlier, pale sage walls, the white oak crib that Amara had chosen herself from a shop in Wicker Park, the small brass lamp on the dresser that threw warm circles on the ceiling. There was a rocking chair in the corner that Dante had picked out without telling her, arriving one morning with it disassembled in the back of an SUV and insisting on putting it together himself, which had taken him 3 hours and a level of profanity that had made Amara laugh until her sides hurt. She sat in that chair. Now she put her hands in her lap and looked at the crib, and she thought about what she was going to do. She wasn't going to scream. She'd already decided that in the elevator. Screaming was for situations that might still go the other way, where the volume of your anger could tip the balance. She understood with complete, terrible clarity that there was no balance to tip. She had seen Dante's hand on that woman's face. She knew the difference between a man who had made a mistake and a man who had settled into a choice. She wasn't going to ask him to choose either. She had watched other women do that. Women in Dante's world, especially because in that world there were always other women, and there were always wives. And the wives who stayed were the ones who had learned to perform ultimatums they never intended to follow through on. It became a kind of ritual, a performance both parties understood. She had always told herself she would never do that, but she'd also always believed she would never have to. She was not going to beg. That was the one thing she was absolutely certain of. Whatever she did next, whatever it cost her, she was not going to beg Dante Valeri to choose her. Not because she didn't love him, she did. She loved him in the specific and exhausting way you love someone you have built your entire daily life around. Someone whose coffee order you know without asking, and whose nightmares you can recognize by the particular way his breathing changes. She loved him, and that love was real, and it was going to hurt like a wound for a very long time. But love didn't mean she had to fight for a man who had stopped fighting for her. She had said that to him in the office. She hadn't planned to say it. The words had just come, fully formed, the way truths sometimes do when you've been unknowingly building to them for months. And sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery, she'd helped decorate. Just how she'd helped choose, wearing the clothes she'd carefully picked out for her swollen, beautiful, exhausting third trimester body. Amara understood that those words were the truest thing she had said to Dante in a very long time. She was tired, not just of tonight, of years, of the bodyguards and the armored cars and the silences at dinners when the wrong person walked in, of the nights she'd spent not sleeping, not because she was afraid of his enemies. She'd made her peace with that fear years ago, but because she'd started being afraid of her own instincts. The way she'd talked herself out of things she noticed. The way she'd learned to translate his distance into stress and his secrecy into protection and his absences into the ordinary cost of the life they'd both chosen. She had worked so hard to keep choosing him, and she had been so careful to do it quietly, the way women learn to keep choosing men quietly, so the men never have to see what it costs. She wasn't angry at herself for that. She was just done with it. Around 2 a.m, she got up from the rocking chair and went to the master bedroom closet. She found the largest suitcase she owned, the one they'd used for their last real vacation, 2 years ago, a week in the Amalfi Coast, that she'd clung to afterward like a talisman. She opened it flat on the bedroom floor and started pulling things out of drawers. Methodically, maternity clothes, her prenatal vitamins. The stuffed rabbit her mother had mailed for the baby, the one Amara had been quietly sleeping with for the last month, because she found it comforting and had felt a little embarrassed about that. The folder of medical records she'd just retrieved from Dante's office. She packed the way she did everything when she was trying to hold herself together, slowly, carefully, putting each thing in its right place. She was still packing when she heard Dante's car come through the gate. She kept packing. She heard the front door. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. She knew his footsteps, the way she knew his breathing, had memorized them without meaning to over 6 years of living in the same spaces. She heard him stop outside the bedroom door. The pause lasted a long time. Then the door opened. Dante looked at the suitcase on the floor. He looked at Amara, kneeling beside it, with a stack of newborn onesies in her hands, tiny, soft, folded with hospital corners, the way her mother had taught her. He looked at the room, which was half ordinarily normal and half quietly dismantled, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite what she'd expected. He didn't look like a man about to make excuses. He looked like a man watching something he couldn't stop. "Don't," he said. Just the one word. "Don't." The voice he used when he meant something absolutely. Amara set the stack of onesies carefully into the suitcase. "Amara." He stepped into the room. "It wasn't Serena, is it's not what it—" "Dante," she looked up at him. "Don't tell me what I saw." The sentence landed somewhere in him. She watched it hit. He pulled a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen 1,000 times. The gesture he made when he was working something out that didn't have a clean solution. "You're 8 months. Pregnant. You're not going anywhere tonight." "I know that," she said. "I'm not leaving tonight." Something in him loosened slightly, which told her he'd misunderstood. "I need more time to pack." The loosening stopped. He stood there with his hand still in his hair and looked at her in a way she couldn't quite read, which almost never happened. Amara had always been able to read Dante. It was one of the things she'd been good at, one of the strange intimate skills you develop loving someone for a long time. She knew his silences and his tells, and the way his jaw tightened when he was deciding whether to lie. She'd always thought of it as closeness. Sitting here now, she understood it could also just be 6 years of surveillance. "She doesn't mean anything," he said finally. Amara folded a pair of maternity leggings with her eyes down. "That's worse," she said, "not better. Worse." He didn't respond to that right away. She heard him exhale. "I have not been—" He stopped. Started again. "This year has been there. Have been things happening with the organization that I couldn't—" "I know what year it's been," Amara said. "I was in it with you. I was there for all of it. I didn't ask you for anything I thought you couldn't give me. I only asked you not to lie." She finally looked up at him. "You lied, Dante. Not just tonight. For months. I asked you what was wrong and you made me feel like I was losing my mind for noticing. You made me feel crazy, and I was stopped." Pressed her lips together. When she continued, her voice was still quiet, still level, and she hated how much work it was taking to keep it that way. "I was trying so hard not to add to your stress. I was trying to be the one thing that wasn't a problem for you. And the whole time," she set her hands flat on the edge of the suitcase, "the whole time you were using that. My patience. The fact that I loved you enough to doubt myself instead of you." Dante's hands were at his sides. His face was doing something complicated and pained, which would have moved her enormously 6 hours ago. And she noticed with a kind of exhausted sadness that it didn't move her now the way it should have. "Tell me what to do," he said. His voice dropped. "Tell me what I have to do." She looked at him for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm going to figure out what I need, and I'll let you know. But right now I need you to leave this room." He left. She sat on the edge of the bed when he was gone, and she put her hands on her stomach and she breathed. The baby moved. Amara closed her eyes. "I've got you," she said quietly to the small room, and the half-packed suitcase and her daughter who didn't know yet what her parents' love story had been, or what it was going to cost both of them to do the next part right. "I've got you. Whatever comes next, I've got you." She stayed like that for a while. Then she reached under the bed for the smaller bag she kept for the hospital, the one that had been packed and ready for 3 weeks, full of the practical, careful preparations of a woman who had done everything right. She picked up her phone. She found the number for her college roommate, Jess, who lived 3 miles away and who had been leaving the door open in the specific unspoken language of women who love each other ever since Amara had married Dante Valeri. The phone rang twice. Jess picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. "Tell me what you need," Jess said. "No questions. No, are you okay, or what happened? Just that. Tell me what you need." Amara closed her eyes again. "I need a place to stay while I figure out what comes next. Me and the baby. I'm not ready to explain everything tonight. I just need—" "The room's already made up," Jess said. "Come whenever you're ready." Amara exhaled slowly. "Thank you." She sat for another moment in the half-dark room that had been hers for 6 years, looking at the hers for 6 years, and the closet that still held half of Dante's things, and wedding photo on the dresser, the one from their ceremony. The two of them standing in a garden in northern Italy, with the mountains behind them. Dante looking at her the way she'd believed, for 6 full years, that no other person in the world was capable of making him look. She reached out and turned the photo face down. Not viciously. Just quietly, with the same deliberateness with which she'd placed her ring on his desk. She picked up the suitcase. She thought about everything she was carrying, the weight of a marriage, the weight of a daughter, the weight of 6 years of loving someone with her whole self, and the strange, raw, terrifying weight of being willing to put that down and find out what was left when it was gone. Her feet hurt, her back ached. She was 8 months pregnant, and it was almost 3 in the morning, and she had just ended her marriage in a voice so quiet. Dante had probably expected her to take it back. She walked out of the room. Dante was sitting on the stairs. He looked up when she came out. He was still in his suit, tie loosened, looking like the specific kind of wrecked that expensively dressed men look when the thing they've destroyed turns out to have been the thing they actually valued. He looked at the suitcase. He looked at her face. He stood. "Amara, not tonight," she said. "Please." He stepped aside. She walked past him and down the stairs, and through the house that she had helped make into a home, past the kitchen where she'd eaten 1,000 breakfasts and the living room where they'd fallen asleep on the couch more times than she could count, and the front door that still had the scratch on the frame from the time they'd tried to bring in a couch by themselves and failed spectacularly and laughed about it for days afterward. She opened the door. The rain had slowed. Marco was at the car before she'd reached the bottom of the steps. He must have seen the light come on, or heard something, or simply known the way good drivers know things, which was to say quietly and without having to be told. He took the suitcase, without a word. He opened the door. Amara got in. She didn't look back at the house. She had learned a long time ago that looking back at things you'd already decided to leave was a particular kind of self-cruelty, and she had done enough of that for one night. The car pulled out through the gate. The security men watched her go. None of them stopped her. None of them would dare. She was the only person in Dante Valeri's entire world, the only person surrounded by his money, and his men, and his decades of carefully constructed power, who had ever simply walked away from him. And somewhere behind the gate, still standing in the doorway she'd just left, Dante Valeri was beginning to understand what it felt like to be the person who had no leverage, no threat, no negotiation left available to him. The city moved past the windows. Amara held her stomach with both hands and watched the lights. She breathed. Jess lived in a brownstone on North Paulina that smelled like old wood and coffee, and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to people who have made peace with living alone. She was standing on the front steps when Marco pulled up, arms crossed against the damp air, wearing a University of Michigan sweatshirt that Amara recognized from college, the same one, impossibly 17 years later, gray and threadbare at the cuffs and absolutely perfect. Amara got out of the car slowly. Marco had the suitcase out before she'd fully straightened. Jess came down the steps without saying anything. She just put her arms around Amara from the side, carefully, in the way people learn to hug pregnant women working around the belly, pressing her chin against Amara's temple. Amara stood still and let herself be held. She didn't cry then either. She wasn't sure she was going to cry at all, and she didn't know whether that made her strong or just broken in a way she hadn't fully identified yet. "Come inside," Jess said. "It's cold." Marco set the suitcase inside the door. He looked at Amara before he left, not the way employees usually look at a boss as deferential and careful, but the way he'd been looking at her for 3 years, which was to say directly, with something in his face that might have been the closest thing to genuine feeling a man in his position ever let himself show. "Call if you need anything, Mrs. Valeri," he said. "Thank you, Marco." He nodded once and left. Jess closed the door. The brownstone was warm. There were dishes drying on the rack in the kitchen, a lamp on in the hallway, a throw blanket on the couch, in the position of something recently used. Normal life. Ordinary, unheroic, normal life, and the sight of it hit Amara somewhere unexpected, the way ordinary things sometimes do when you've been living inside something that stopped being ordinary a long time ago. "Are you hungry?" Jess asked. "No." "Okay, you want tea or something stronger?" "Tea," Amara said. "Then actually, do you have anything that isn't herbal?" Jess looked at her stomach. "The baby," Amara said. "I know. Tea is fine." She sat at Jess's kitchen table, while Jess filled the kettle and got out the mugs and moved around her own kitchen, with the comfortable efficiency of someone who didn't need an audience. And Amara put her hands flat on the table and looked at where her ring used to be. The skin there was slightly indented, a pale band of impression left by 6 years of metal. She closed her hand into a fist. He was with someone, she said. Jess set down the mugs. I saw them in his office. He had his hand on her face. She paused. It wasn't the first time. I don't know how I know that, but I know it. Jess sat down across from her. She didn't say I'm sorry, or I knew something was off, or any of the things people say in these moments, because they don't know what else to reach for. She just looked at Amara the way you look at someone you've known long enough to understand that sometimes there's nothing useful to add. What do you need? Jess asked. I need to figure out a lawyer, Amara said. I need to figure out what my rights are. And she stopped. I need to get through the next few weeks without doing anything. I'll regret because I'm exhausted and 8 months pregnant and I don't fully trust my own judgment right now. Your judgment sounds pretty solid to me, Jess said. The kettle started to boil. She slept in Jess's guest room under 2 quilts and a down comforter, and she did not sleep well, which she'd expected. She lay awake for a long time watching the ceiling and listening to Jess's neighborhood quieter than the mansion. No security rotations, no gates, just the distant movement of the city and occasional rain against the window. The baby moved at 2 and again, at 4. Little adjustments, repositioning herself the way she'd been doing this whole last month, getting ready for something neither of them could quite see yet. Amara put her hand on her stomach in the dark. I know, she said quietly. I know. She finally slept around 5 and woke at 8 to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jess on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in the low, clipped voice she used for work. Amara lay still for a moment, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling of someone else's guest room and feeling the particular strangeness of waking up in a life that was already different than it had been the morning before. Her phone had 19 notifications. She turned it face down without looking at them. She showered. She got dressed in the maternity clothes she'd packed, a navy blue top that stretched across her stomach and comfortable dark pants, and she looked at herself in Jess's bathroom mirror for a moment. 8 months pregnant, eyes that had taken longer than usual to clear from sleep. A face that looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had made an irrevocable decision in the middle of the night and was now standing on the other side of it in someone else's bathroom, trying to figure out how to eat breakfast. She went to the kitchen. Jess handed her a glass of orange juice without looking up from her laptop. I called someone, Jess said. A friend from law school who does family law now. She's good. She'll call you this afternoon if that's okay. Amara sat down. You didn't have to do that. I did it before you woke up, so you couldn't tell me not to. Jess finally looked up. Is that okay? Yes, Amara said. Thank you. She drank the juice. She picked at a piece of toast. She finally picked up her phone and looked at the notifications. 11 text messages from Dante. 4 missed text messages, 4 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and a text from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be Dante's second-in-command, Nico Ferrara, which was so audacious, it briefly took her breath away. She set the phone down again, without opening any of them. He's going to send people, she said, not panicked, just factual. Jess looked at her over her coffee mug. He's going to send someone to talk to me, Amara said. Or he's going to come himself. He doesn't know how to. She stopped. Because she was about to say, he doesn't know how to leave something alone, and she realized how deeply strange it was to be describing your husband's fundamental character to someone else, as if he were a phenomenon you were explaining rather than a person you had loved. He's not going to just accept this quietly. This is my house, Jess said simply. Nobody comes in my house without my permission, Jess. He can send whoever he wants to the sidewalk. The sidewalk is public property. Amara looked at her. You've been preparing for this, Amara said. Jess set down her mug. I've been hoping I'd never have to use the preparation, she said. But yeah, a little bit, yeah. Dante came himself. Not that morning, she had until the afternoon before Marco's replacement driver, a young man named Sal, who'd never once made eye contact with Amara, and who she had always privately considered Dante's most obedient employee, appeared on the street outside Jess's brownstone. He didn't knock. He just stood on the sidewalk like a very expensive garden ornament. What was so subtle than knocking would have been. Amara watched him from the second-floor window for a moment. Then she went back to her phone call with the lawyer, whose name was Patricia Chen, and who had always liked clean steel, and had asked Amara 3 precise, surgical questions in the first 2 minutes of their conversation that had immediately made Amara trust her completely. "Tell me everything," Patricia said, "from the beginning." "Take your time," Amara told her. Patricia listened without interrupting, which Amara appreciated. She took notes. Amara could hear the quiet click of a keyboard, and when Amara finished, there was a brief pause. "Okay," Patricia said. "Here's what I need you to understand. You have significant legal standing. You're married, you're 8 months pregnant, and the marital estate is substantial. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. Your first priority is documentation." "He'll cooperate," Amara said, and then stopped, because she didn't actually know if that was true anymore. "Maybe," Patricia said in the tone of someone who had heard that sentence many times. "And maybe not. Let's make sure we don't need his cooperation to establish what you're entitled to." They spoke for 40 minutes. When Amara hung up, she sat on the edge of the guest bed with her hands in her lap, and she felt, for the first time since the elevator, something that wasn't grief or exhaustion or the terrible specific clarity of a decision you can't take back. She felt something smaller and harder and more manageable, a direction, a next step, the faint structural comfort of knowing what the next 24 hours needed to contain. It wasn't okay, but it was a foothold, and that was enough for right now. Dante arrived at 6 in the evening. He didn't send anyone ahead. He came himself, which she'd expected, and he came alone, which she hadn't. Dante Valeri did not go places alone. His whole life was structured around the principle that a man in his position presented targets, and targets needed layers between themselves and anything that might want to reach them. Seeing him step out of the car by himself, no Nico, no security, just Dante in a dark coat, with his hair not quite as managed as usual, made something complicated move through her chest before she could stop it. She didn't go to the door. Jess went to the door. Amara sat in the living room and listened. "I need to speak with Amara," Dante said. His voice came through the door, clearly. It was the voice he used when he was controlling himself low, even carefully modulated the voice of a man who had learned that you did not have to raise your voice to make people understand. You meant every word. "She knows you're here," Jess said. "If she wanted to talk to you, she'd be at this door." A pause. "She's 8 months pregnant and she left in the middle of the night." "I need to know she's fine," Jess said. "She's safe. She's being taken care of. I would like to hear that from her." "I'm sure you would." Another pause, longer. He didn't know Jess's last name, Amara realized. In 6 years, she had mentioned Jess dozens of times, and Dante had never once asked her last name. "She is carrying my daughter. Whatever has happened between us, whatever has happened between you is the reason she's here and not there," Jess said. "That's a sentence I'm going to need you to sit with for a minute." The pause this time was different in quality. Amara knew that silence. She'd lived with it. It was the silence of Dante recalibrating, finding the approach that actually worked, because his first approach had been blocked, and the one thing Dante Valeri never did was continue down a road that wasn't moving. "Please," he said. The word landed oddly, even through a closed door. She had never in 6 years heard Dante Valeri say, "please," in that particular register. He said please the way powerful men say please, as punctuation, not as vulnerability. This was different. This was a man saying a word he didn't have a lot of practice with. Amara got up. She walked to the door. Jess stepped slightly aside, not all the way, just enough, staying in the frame the way a wall stays in a frame. Amara looked at Dante through the gap. He looked terrible. Not the kind of terrible she'd expected, not red-eyed or disheveled, because Dante didn't do that kind of falling apart outwardly. He looked terrible, the way a building looks the moment after the internal load-bearing structure has given way, still standing, still recognizably itself, but with something essential missing underneath. She had put that look on his face. She registered the fact without satisfaction or guilt. It was simply true. I'm okay, she said. The baby's okay. You don't have to worry about that part. That's not the only part I'm worried about. I know. She held the door frame with one hand. But it's the part I'm willing to address right now. Amara, his voice dropped. Dante. She met his eyes. I have an attorney. She'll be in contact with your attorney. We're going to handle everything appropriately, and I'm going to make sure our daughter has everything she needs. That's what I can offer you right now. That's all I can offer you right now. He looked at her for a long moment. This isn't a negotiation I know how to have, he said. I know, she said. I'm sorry about that. Genuinely. She straightened. Good night. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it and listened to him stand on the other side for a moment that stretched longer than she'd expected. Then she heard his footsteps on the steps. Then the car. Then nothing. Jess looked at her. You okay? No, Amara said honestly. But I will be. The flowers came the next morning. Not a modest arrangement. Not a thoughtful, correctly scaled gesture of remorse. Dante sent 36 white peonies in a crystal vase that looked like it had been sourced from somewhere that didn't have prices on the menu. Delivered by a florist who clearly had no idea what domestic situation he was walking into and who handed them to Jess with the nervous energy of someone being watched by someone he couldn't see. Jess signed for them. Then she looked at Amara. What do you want to do with these? Amara looked at the flowers. They're beautiful, she said, which was true. They are, Jess agreed. Put them on the porch, Amara said. The neighbors can enjoy them. Jess put them on the porch. The jewelry came 2 days after that, a bracelet in a dark velvet box, delivered by Nico Ferrara in person, which was an escalation in emissary rank that would have amused Amara if she'd had any room left in her to be amused. Nico was Dante's oldest friend, as much as he was his second in command. A man who had grown up 3 blocks from Dante in the same neighborhood, and who had the specific combination of loyalty and calculation that Dante had always surrounded himself with. Nico stood on the porch and held the box in both hands, like he was delivering something ceremonial. He wanted to give it to you himself, Nico said. I told him you probably wouldn't see him. You told him correctly, Amara said, through the partially open door. Nico looked down at the box. He was not a man accustomed to being in positions that didn't have a clear next move, and the awkwardness on him was visible in the way he shifted his weight. He's not sleeping, Nico said. I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I've known Dante for 23 years, and I've never... He stopped. Started again. He's not handling this the way I expected. How did you expect him to handle it? Amara asked. Nico looked at her directly. Honestly, I expected him to get angry. To come in force and make demands and treat this like a business problem that could be solved by applying enough pressure. He paused. He hasn't done any of that. He came alone 2 nights ago, Amara said. I know, Nico said. He told me. He also told me what you said to him at the door. He turned the velvet box over in his hands once. I've never heard him quote someone back to me, word for word like that. He had every word of what you said. Amara looked at the box. I don't want the bracelet, Nico, she said. I know, he held it out anyway. He asked me to give it to you regardless. She didn't take it. After a moment, Nico nodded once and pocketed the box and turned and walked back to the car. He paused at the bottom of the steps. For what it's worth, he said, not looking back, I should have told him to handle things differently a long time ago. I thought, another stop. We all thought you'd be fine. Because you always seemed fine. I was very good at seeming fine, Amara said. Nico didn't respond to that. He got in the car. It pulled away. Pametti. Amara closed the door and leaned against it and pressed both hands against her stomach and breathed until the tightness in her throat loosened enough to let her breathe normally. She had not been fine. She had been managing, which was a different thing entirely, and she had managed so completely, and for so long, that apparently even the men who worked closest to Dante had read her management as contentment. She didn't know whether to be furious at them for that, or at herself for being so accomplished at making it invisible. But she settled, as she often had in the past year, for neither because spending her energy on who was most to blame, for what was a luxury she could not currently afford. She had a baby coming. She had a life to build. She had exactly enough room in her current reserves for forward movement, and not a drop more. On the fourth day, Dante bought a house. She found out from Patricia, which was how she'd started finding out most things about Dante's movements filtered through the clean, precise language of legal communication, which stripped the emotional content out of his actions and left the architecture of them visible. He had purchased a property in Lincoln Park, 4 bedrooms, a garden, good school district. The deed was in Amara's name only. Patricia told her this in the same tone she used for everything. "He can't transfer a deed to you without your signature at closing," Patricia said. "He'll need you to formally accept it." "I won't," Amara said. "I'll communicate that," Patricia said. She did. Dante's attorney responded the same afternoon with an offer to hold the property in trust until Amara was ready to accept. Patricia advised Amara she didn't have to respond at all if she didn't want to. She didn't respond. The property stayed in trust. The flowers on Jess's porch finally wilted. Amara went to her prenatal appointment, and the doctor confirmed that everything was on track and that the baby was positioned correctly and was approximately 6.5 pounds and had what appeared on the ultrasound to be a very specific expression of calm self-containment that the doctor said probably didn't mean anything, but that Amara chose to take as a sign of excellent judgment. She laughed at that. It was the first time she'd laughed in 5 days, and the sound surprised her, coming out more easily than she'd expected, more real. Jess, sitting in the chair in the corner of the exam room, because Amara had asked her to come, looked up from her phone at the sound of it. "What?" Jess asked. "She looks serious," Amara said, nodding at the ultrasound screen. "Like she's already decided she's not impressed." Jess looked at the screen and snorted. "She looks like you," she said. "That's your face. That has been your face since freshman year of college." "That is not my face. That is 100% your face." Amara looked at the grainy image on the screen, the small, composed, not yet formed face of her daughter, who did not know about Dante or Serena or penthouse offices or velvet jewelry boxes or houses purchased in someone's name as a gesture of remorse, who only knew warmth and the sound of Amara's voice and the particular rhythm of a body that had spent the last 8 months trying very hard to keep them both safe. "Elodie," Amara said. Softly the name settled. She hadn't said it out loud before, not like this. Not as an address, not as a name directed at the actual human being she was about to become responsible for. She'd written it in lists, said it to Jess in the context of "we're thinking Elodie," used it in conversations with her mother on the phone. But she hadn't said it like this. "Hi, Elodie," she said. "I'm sorry things got complicated before you got here. We're going to figure it out." The doctor, who had clearly heard a great many things in exam rooms over the years, smiled gently and began printing the ultrasound images without comment. The call came 9 days after Amara had left. She was sitting at Jess's kitchen table, working her way through a stack of documents Patricia had sent over: financial disclosures, property records, the early architecture of a divorce from a man whose assets were complex and layered in ways that could apparently take months to fully map. She had a mug of tea at her elbow, and Jess's cat, a gray thing named Everett, who had expressed initial skepticism about Amara's presence, and then decided to sleep on her feet, which she chose to read as acceptance. The number on her phone wasn't Dante's. It was the line for his head of security, a man named Briggs, who Amara had met maybe 4 times in 6 years, and who had always given her the specific impression of a man who assessed every room he entered for exits before he looked for anything else. She picked up. "Mrs. Valeri." Briggs's voice was completely flat. Not robotic, just flat, in the way of someone who had trained himself to keep his voice from carrying any information he hadn't decided to transmit. "I need to inform you of a development." "What development?" "Our intelligence suggests that a faction associated with the Benedetti organization has taken an interest in your current location. Specifically, an interest in your current vulnerability while you're outside the main residence." The word vulnerability landed like something dropped on a hard floor. Amara set down her pen. "How serious?" she said. It wasn't a question, exactly. It was the tone she'd heard Dante use countless times when he was asking for a real answer rather than a managed one. "Serious enough that Mr. Valeri has authorized me to call you directly rather than communicate through your attorney," Briggs said. He wanted you to have the information unfiltered. I appreciate that, Amara said carefully. What is he recommending? He's recommending a security detail. 2 men, rotating shifts, unobtrusive. You wouldn't need to interact with them or change anything about your current arrangements. And what does he want in exchange for this? A pause. Nothing, Briggs said. He was specific about that. He said to tell you directly, this is not a negotiation. It's not leverage. And if you decline, he will respect that decision. But the threat is real, and he wanted you to know. Amara looked at Everett on her feet. Give me until tomorrow morning, she said. Of course. She hung up. Jess was leaning in the kitchen doorway. She'd come in quietly somewhere during the call, and she'd been listening in that Jess way, present, attentive, not pretending she hadn't heard. I heard, Jess said. I know. What are you going to do? Amara looked at the table, the financial documents, the tea, the pen she'd set down, the small, ordinary geography of a morning that had just shifted on its axis. He's not lying about the threat, she said. Dante doesn't use the baby as leverage. Whatever else he's done, he doesn't do that. She pressed her fingers against the table. These are real people who actually want to hurt me because of who I'm married to. And I'm 8 months pregnant, so you'll take the security. Taking the security means I'm still inside his world, Amara said. Even out here, even having walked away. She stopped. The sentence couldn't finish itself cleanly, which told her something. You're the mother of his child, Jess said gently. That's not the same as still being his wife. Amara sat with that. I know, she said finally. I know. She agreed to the security detail. 2 men appeared the next morning, parking with the particular neutral competence of Dante's better employees. Not aggressive, not visible unless you looked for them. Amara told herself it was practical. She told herself it didn't mean anything about where she and Dante stood. She told herself she would have made the same decision, regardless. She told herself a lot of things over the next 4 days. And then, on a Tuesday night, 10 minutes after Amara had settled into bed and turned off the light, she heard the sound of a car on the street outside change in a way that made something animal in her go completely still, followed by a sharp, physical impact, followed by Jess's voice from somewhere in the house, sharp and high in a way Amara had never heard Jess sound. Amara. And then the men outside were moving, fast. The next 48 hours would teach Amara things about herself. She hadn't known things about what her body could do under pressure, what her voice sounded like when she was using it to hold herself together in a car that had just been forced off the road, what it felt like to sit in the back of a vehicle with her arms wrapped around her own body while gunfire happened somewhere in the dark outside. And it would teach her one more thing. That Dante Valeri, the man she had left, the man she was divorcing, the man whose hand she had watched on another woman's face, could move through a crisis scene faster than his security team, could reach her car door before anyone else did, and could put his body between her and the dark with a speed and completeness that told her, whether she wanted the information or not, that whatever else he had done and failed to be, the one thing he had never lied to her about was that he had never stopped being willing to die for her. She held on to that thought in the back of the ambulance, not because it changed anything, it didn't. She had been clear with herself about that, but because her brain needed something solid to grip while the paramedic pressed 2 fingers against her wrist and counted her pulse and the vehicle moved through. Chicago streets with its lights cutting through the dark. Dante was in the front. He had refused to leave the scene until she was in the ambulance, and had refused to get in a separate vehicle once she was, and nobody had argued with him about either of those decisions, which told Amara something about how bad the scene behind them had looked. She hadn't seen much of it. She'd seen the windshield of Jess's borrowed car folding inward from the impact. She'd seen the door wrenched open from outside, and she'd seen Dante's face appearing in that open door, not panicked, because Dante did not panic, but carrying an expression she had no word for, something past urgency, something that existed below the level of strategy or calculation, a look that was simply animal and immediate and entirely about her. He'd said her name once, just her name, Amara, like a check, like confirming something he'd been afraid he wouldn't find. Then he'd gotten her out of the car with his body. Between her and the gunfire, she could hear from the far end of the block. And he'd moved her to his vehicle, another car, appearing from somewhere, his men's surrounding them, and he'd kept one hand on her back the entire time. Not gripping, just present. The way you keep a hand on something you are terrified of losing in a crowd. She hadn't said anything to him. She hadn't known what to say. The words she'd been living inside for the past 2 weeks. The clean, painful, necessary words of a woman building distance, with intention. None of them fit the inside of a moving car, while her daughter kicked against her ribs in what felt like outrage. "The baby's moving," she said to the paramedic. "That's a good sign," the paramedic said. His name tag said Reyes. He had very steady hands. "Any pain? Contractions? Anything that feels like pressure low in your abdomen?" "No," she said. "No, she's just moving." "Okay. We're almost there." She turned her head and looked through the small window between the back of the ambulance and the front. She could see the back of Dante's head. He was sitting forward, elbows on his knees, and even from behind, she could read the particular rigidity of his spine, not the controlled tension of a man managing a situation, but the rigid stillness of a man who had run out of things to manage and was left with only waiting. She looked away. The hospital was Mercy General, 15 minutes from Jess's neighborhood. They brought Amara through the emergency entrance and into a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and a doctor whose name she didn't catch immediately began a rapid assessment, while 2 nurses moved around her with the specific choreography of people who had done this many times and knew how not to get in each other's way. She was not in labor. That was the first thing they confirmed, and the relief of it was physical, a loosening behind her sternum that she hadn't realized she'd been bracing against. The baby's heart rate was strong and regular. Amara had a bruise developing along her left shoulder from the impact, and her hands were shaking in a way that wasn't stopping, which the doctor said was adrenaline and was normal and would pass. "We want to monitor you for a few hours," the doctor said. "Given the gestational age, we want to be sure." "Okay," Amara said. "Is there someone, your husband? A family member you want us to?" "There's a man in the waiting area," Amara said. "Dante Valeri. Can you tell him I'm okay?" "Just that. Just that I'm okay and the baby's okay." The doctor nodded and left. Amara lay in the hospital bed with monitors attached, and her hands, finally slowly, beginning to stop shaking, and she stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about the past 2 weeks. The careful steps she'd taken, the attorney, the documents, the deliberate construction of distance, and the deliberate preservation of her own dignity, and the deliberate intentional effort to do this the right way, without rage, without theater, without becoming someone she didn't recognize. And here she was anyway, hospital ceiling, monitors. 8 months pregnant, in a bed that smelled like institutional cleaning products, because the man she was divorcing had made enemies who had decided that the fastest way to hurt him was through her. She had not chosen his enemies. She had not chosen his world. She had loved him in spite of it and accepted the fear of it and built a life inside it. And she had genuinely believed that the walls he built were enough to mean that the violence stayed outside, that it couldn't find her in the spaces she'd tried to make soft and ordinary a kitchen, a brownstone, 3 miles from the mansion she'd left. She pressed her hands flat against the mattress on either side of her. She was not going to fall apart in this room. She was going to get through the next few hours, and then she was going to talk to Patricia in the morning, and then she was going to figure out what the next step looked like. That was all. One thing at a time. She had been doing one thing at a time for 2 weeks, and she was still standing, still making decisions with a clear head. And she was not going to stop now because someone had tried to frighten her. She had not let Dante frighten her out of leaving. She was not going to let his enemies frighten her back. The door opened. She expected a nurse. It was Dante. He had blood on his shirt, not his own. She registered quickly. It was on the sleeve, too far from his body to be a wound he was carrying, and his hair was wrong, pushed back, like he'd run a hand through it too many times. And he was standing in the doorway with the specific posture of a man who had knocked and entered before hearing an answer, and was now rethinking whether that had been a mistake. "They said you were awake," he said. I am awake, she said. He stayed in the doorway. She noted that. He didn't come to the bed, didn't move into the room. He stood at the threshold like a man who understood he had lost the automatic right to close distances. Baby, he said. She's fine. Heart rate's good. I'm on the monitor to be sure, but they're not concerned. He exhaled. The sound of it was not controlled. It was the exhale of a man releasing something he had been holding in his chest since the moment a phone call told him his pregnant wife's car had been forced off a road. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They looked at each other across the room. Thank you, she said, for getting there when you did. Don't thank me for that, he said. His voice came out rougher than she'd heard it in years. Please don't thank me for that, Dante. I put you in this, he said. Those men tonight, they came at you because of my name. Because they knew. He stopped. His jaw worked. Because they knew that the one place I could be hurt was you. And I? Another stop. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment in a gesture she had never seen him make, not once in 6 years. I had not secured that sufficiently. I had not. The sentence broke apart. Amara watched him. She had expected anger. Eventually his anger, displaced toward her or toward the situation or toward the intractable fact that she had left and his power had not been able to keep her from leaving. She had expected negotiation. She had expected the version of Dante that had run every difficult situation she'd watched him navigate for 6 years, strategic, controlled, finding the lever that moved the thing he needed moved. She had not expected this. This was not strategy. This was a man with blood on his sleeve, standing in a hospital doorway, unable to finish his own sentences. You should get some rest, she said carefully. There's nothing more to do tonight. I'm not leaving this building, he said. That's your decision. She looked back at the ceiling. I'm not going to argue with you about it. He didn't respond. After a moment, she heard him move not toward her, but to the side, to the chair along the wall near the door. She heard him sit. She didn't look at him. She listened to the monitor, reading her daughter's heartbeat in steady digital rhythm, and she breathed and she let the room be quiet. He was still there when she fell asleep. She woke at 3 a.m. to a sound that took her a moment to identify. Voices from the hallway. Dante's voice, low and sharp, and another voice she didn't recognize, male, clipped, the kind of voice that delivered information in bullet points, regardless of the hour. She was awake and oriented within seconds, which had become her new normal. The 3rd trimester had already demolished her ability to surface from sleep slowly. She couldn't hear the words. She could hear the tone. Dante's voice had shifted into the register she privately thought of as his operational mode, stripped of everything personal, running on pure function, making decisions in real time the way a machine makes calculations. She had heard that voice during late-night calls she wasn't supposed to overhear, through closed doors, and it had always made the back of her neck prickle, not with fear exactly, but with the reminder of what her husband actually was when the version she knew stepped aside. She heard the other man say something that made Dante stop speaking mid-sentence. Total stop. No completion. Just absence where his voice had been. Then say that again.
Flat.
Absolutely flat. The flatness of something being suppressed with total force. The other voice repeated something. She still couldn't make out the words. Get Nico, Dante said now, and lock down the hospital floor. Footsteps. Rapid. Silence. Then Dante's voice alone. So quiet she might have imagined it. How long? She didn't hear an answer. She lay in the dark, with the monitor beeping softly and her daughter's heartbeat steady and reliable in the electronic readout above her, and she told herself it wasn't her business. Whatever Dante was handling in that hallway, whatever piece of his criminal architecture had just come apart at 3 a.m, it was not her business anymore. She had left. She had an attorney. She was building a life that did not include standing in doorways, trying to interpret the silences in Dante Valeri's operational voice. She told herself all of that. She watched the ceiling. At 3:47, the door opened. Dante came back in. He moved to his chair and sat. And she could feel the difference in the room from the way he occupied it. Something charged, something altered, something that had not been there before the voices in the hallway. What happened? She said. He didn't answer immediately. Dante. She pushed herself up onto one elbow. What happened? He looked at her across the room. In the dim light of the hospital room, with only the monitor glow and the pale strip of light under the door, she could see his face clearly enough to read it, and what she saw was something she had no prior reference for. Not in 6 years, not in any situation she had watched him navigate. She saw a man who had been genuinely blindsided. The attack tonight, he said. It didn't come from the Benedetti faction. She waited. It came from inside my own organization, he said. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Amara sat up fully, moving carefully, the monitor cord shifting with her. What are you saying? Someone in my organization gave the Benedettis your location. His voice was so controlled, it was almost without color. Not just where you were staying, your schedule, your medical appointments. When you'd be moving. He paused. They had detailed information. The kind that doesn't come from observation. The kind that comes from access. She stared at him. Someone who knew you, she said. Someone who knew us, he said. Someone inside my inner circle. The silence between them expanded. Serena, Amara said. The name came out without calculation, the way pattern recognition works before your thinking brain has caught up. Serena Voss, who had access to Dante, whose position in his organization meant she moved through the upper levels of his world. Who would have known, from Dante's behavior and his communications and the particular specific quality of his preoccupation, in the weeks since Amara had left, exactly what Amara meant to him and exactly how to use it. Dante's expression confirmed it before he spoke. She's gone, he said. She left the city 48 hours ago. We're tracking her, but his jaw tightened. She had a head start she shouldn't have had, which means someone else helped her move. Amara felt something shift inside her that wasn't grief this time. It was colder than grief, harder. She knew, Amara said slowly. Before I found out. She knew I'd found out. And she what? She decided to... She made a deal, Dante said, with people who wanted leverage over me. He looked at her directly. You were the leverage. The room felt different all of a sudden. The monitor kept beeping. Elodie's heartbeat kept its steady rhythm. Outside the door, somewhere down the hall, Amara could hear the controlled movement of Dante's men locking down the floor. She was using you too, Amara said, the whole time. The affair wasn't just it wasn't personal, it was access. I don't know how much of it was planned from the beginning, Dante said. I don't know when she made the deal. I know it existed. I know she gave them you. He said the last 2 words with a precision that made something in his physique look like it was barely holding its shape. You're saying, Amara said carefully, that the woman you had an affair with was working with your enemies. That she gathered intelligence on you through that affair. And that when I found out and left, when you became emotionally unstable, from a tactical perspective, she used the information she had to put me in the position I was in tonight. Yes, he said. Amara looked at her hands on the hospital blanket. She was waiting for the rage. She thought it should arrive now, the hot, expansive rage of a woman who had been used as a game piece, in something she never agreed to participate in, who had been targeted not for anything she'd done, but for the specific quality of her value to a man who had betrayed her first. She waited for it the way you wait for a wave you can see coming. It didn't come. What came instead was something much quieter and much more frightening. Clarity. She knew things about my schedule, Amara said. Yes. My medical appointments. The specific times I'd be in the car. Yes. And you're saying she got that from access to you. From your phone, your calendar, the things you said to her about. She stopped. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. Dante, were you telling her things about me? About my schedule and where I was going and... No, his voice was immediate. No, she had access to my communications. My calendar. My assistant's calendar. She didn't need me to tell her anything. She would have seen everything from the administrative access she'd been granted for the organization. He ran a hand through his hair. I gave her that access. It was a business role. I trusted her professionally because... He stopped. Because he had trusted her in other ways first. The sentence finished itself in the air between them, without either of them saying it. Because of the affair, Amara said. Yes. She nodded once. Slowly. So, she said, the affair that broke our marriage was also the method by which someone got close enough to your operation to target me. She looked at the wall. The thing you did that hurt me personally was also the thing that put me in physical danger. Yes, he said. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay? I'm not saying okay like it's fine, she said. I'm saying okay like I've heard what you've told me and I need a moment to figure out what to do with it. She looked down at her stomach. Because right now I have a daughter who needs to be born safely and a life I'm trying to build that doesn't have room for me to fall apart. And whatever I feel about what you've just told me is going to have to wait in line behind the things that can't wait. Dante looked at her for a long moment. You're doing it again, he said quietly. What? The thing you do, he said, where you manage. Where you hold everything still and do the next practical thing and don't let anyone see the cost. He paused. I spent 6 years being grateful for that. I thought it meant you were strong. I understand now that I was using it. She turned to look at him. He met her eyes. He didn't look away. I'm not saying that to make you feel sorry for me, he said. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to hear that I see it. Even if I'm the wrong person to be the one saying so. Even if it doesn't change anything. He set his hands on his knees, the gesture of a man not sure what to do with his hands. I'm sorry, Amara. I'm not going to tell you what I'm sorry for, because you know everything I'm sorry for better than I do. I just want you to know that I see it. The monitor beeped. Elodie moved. Amara looked down at the rounded shape of her own abdomen under the hospital blanket, and she pressed one hand flat against it. She did not respond to what Dante had said. Not because she had nothing to say. She had too much. She had layers and chambers of response built up over the past weeks that could have filled the room, but because some things she had learned didn't need to be answered in the moment. Some things you let sit where they landed. You need to find out who else in your organization knew about this, she said finally. Dante straightened slightly. I need to know whether anyone who knew about me, my location, my schedules, my situation is still inside your circle, she said. Because I'm not going back into your mansion. I'm not going to let you move me somewhere more controlled. But I need to know whether there are other people who have the kind of access Serena had who might still be. I'm already auditing the entire inner circle, Dante said. Nico's running it. By morning we'll have. I need Patricia to be part of that process, Amara said. He blinked. My attorney, Amara said. Whatever information you develop about the security situation needs to be communicated to me through her, officially, not through your men. Not through Nico, through Patricia Chen. I need a clear paper trail of every communication about my safety, because I am in a legal process with you, and I am not going to find out later that something was used or withheld or framed in a way that affected my position. She met his eyes. Do you understand? He looked at her. Yes, he said. Whatever you need. Thank you. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling again. The night continued. By morning, 3 things had happened. Nico had identified 2 additional people inside the organization's inner circle who had likely provided Serena with the supplementary access she'd needed to maintain her intelligence operation. Both had been removed from their positions. Both would be in the way that Dante's world handled such things, which Amara chose not to ask about because she had learned years ago that there was a specific quality of not asking that was distinct from not knowing. And she had always permitted herself that distinction. Patricia had been briefed, and Serena Voss had been located. She had not made it out of state. She'd gotten as far as a hotel in Milwaukee before Dante's people, working in coordination with a private security firm that operated in a legal space, Amara didn't examine too closely, found her. She was being returned to Chicago, which meant she would face consequences, and those consequences would not take place inside any courtroom. Amara found out about Serena's location through Nico, who arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees, and the specific expression of a man delivering a report. He was not entirely sure how it would land. She's in custody, Nico said, in the hallway, while Dante was inside the room. Mr. Valeri wanted you to know. Amara held the coffee. Is she going to be hurt? Amara said. Nico paused. That's not a question I'm in a position to, Nico. Amara looked at him. I'm not asking because I want to stop it or because I want to allow it. I'm asking Because I need to know what world my daughter is being born into. I need to know how much of this, of what Dante does, is going to be around her while she's growing up. Nico looked at her for a moment. She'll be questioned, he said finally. And then she'll be dealt with. Beyond that, he paused. What I can tell you is that Mr. Valeri has been very specific in the past 12 hours about what he is and isn't willing to authorize. He's not the same as he was before you left. Amara looked at him. Don't mistake grief for character change, she said. Nico's expression shifted. I'm not. I've known Dante Valeri since we were both teenagers, and I have never in that time seen him choose something over the organization. Last night he left a meeting that could have cost him control of the Eastern District to get to this hospital. He didn't hesitate. He didn't tell anyone else to go. He walked out of the room. Nico turned the coffee cup in his hands. That's not grief. That's a decision about what matters. Amara didn't respond. She went back inside. Dante was sitting in his chair, still in last night's clothes, with dried blood on his sleeve and his eyes showing the specific quality of exhaustion that comes not from the body, but from something longer and more structural. The exhaustion of a man who has been running on a set of convictions for many years, and has recently found out that several of them were wrong. He looked up when she came in. The doctor will be here in an hour to check the monitor results, she said. After that, if everything looks good, I'm going to be discharged. Where will you go? He said. Not back to Jess's, she said. It's not safe for her. I'll figure out something else. Dante. A hotel, he said quickly. Not the mansion. Not anywhere that's mine. A hotel of your choosing, booked under whatever name you want. Security arranged the way you want it arranged. I won't come there. I won't have access to which room you're in. He stopped. I need to know you're somewhere with walls around you until we're certain side of my organization is clean. She looked at him. She wanted to say no on principle, because the principle mattered, the principle of her independence, the principle of the life she was building, the principle of not allowing his world to make decisions about where she slept and how she was kept safe. But her daughter was 32 weeks along, and she had been in a car that had been forced off a road the night before, and principle, she was beginning to understand, was a luxury with a weight limit. I'll call Patricia, she said. She'll find the hotel. Whatever she chooses, he said. And Dante. She stood in the center of the room, with the morning light coming in through the window behind her, and she looked at him with everything she had. When this is over, when I'm somewhere safe, and the immediate threat is handled, I need you to understand that we go back to what was happening before last night. The divorce proceedings, the legal process, the distance. She pressed her hands together. What happened last night was terrifying, and I am grateful you were there, and I will never pretend otherwise. But it doesn't change what happened before it. You understand that? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I understand. She nodded. The monitor beeped. Elodie moved again, a long, slow pressure against Amara's right side, the kind of movement that felt purposeful, almost impatient. The person who had been hearing this conversation through walls and had opinions about all of it. She's restless, the doctor said from the doorway, arriving with her tablet and her quiet, practiced calm. Let's see how we're doing. Amara climbed back onto the bed. She lay back and looked at the ceiling and let the doctor begin her assessment, and she breathed the way she'd been breathing since the night she'd left, slowly, deliberately, the breath reaching all the way down. Keeping herself tethered, keeping the next step in her sight. She didn't look at Dante, but she knew, with the specific precision of someone who had loved a person long enough to know his silences, that he was looking at her. And she knew something else, something she would not have admitted out loud, something she kept private in the way she had learned to keep the difficult things private, that the thing Nico had said in the hallway had not landed the way she'd wanted it to. She had expected to be able to put it aside easily, to file it under grief, not character, to hold the distance she needed with both hands. It had not filed easily, the way he'd moved through that parking lot, the way he'd said her name, the way he was sitting right now in a chair he had no right to be in clothes he hadn't changed, in a condition she had never seen him end, was still, even now, simply staying. Not demanding, not negotiating, just staying. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Stop it, she told herself, with the firmness of a woman who had fought very hard for the clarity she'd built and was not going to let a single, terrifying night erode it. He broke it first. Remember that. Remember how that elevator felt. She remembered. She held on to it. Outside the window, Chicago was waking up, traffic building, light sharpening, the city returning to its ordinary, indifferent hum, as if a car had not been run off a road in its streets the night before. Yet, as if a woman had not spent the night in a hospital bed with a monitor on her unborn daughter. As if a marriage had not been unraveling for weeks toward this particular morning, where the man who had broken it was sitting 6 feet away, covered in someone else's blood, because he had put his body between his wife, something that should never have been able to reach her. The doctor said something about the monitor readings. Amara answered. She was composed. She was present. She was doing the next practical thing. She was also in some small and stubbornly honest corner of herself that she had not yet found a way to silence, beginning to understand that the thing she was fighting against was not only Dante. It was the version of herself that still knew every angle of his face in the dark, and still recognized the sound of him breathing across a room, and still, despite everything, despite the elevator and the ring on the desk, and the 2 weeks of careful, deliberate walking away, still loved him. She didn't say it out loud. She wasn't going to say it out loud. She packed that knowledge into the same compartment where she kept every other thing that was true, but not yet useful, and she closed the door on it. And she focused on the doctor's voice, and the monitor readings, and the practical geography of what came next. The readings were good. The baby was fine. By 10 in the morning, Amara was discharged. Patricia had found a hotel, a quiet, unremarkable place on the north side that had nothing to do with Dante's network, booked under the name of Patricia's paralegal, 3rd floor, corner room, 2 security men in the hallway that Amara had agreed to after 40 minutes of internal argument with herself. Dante's men. She had agreed to Dante's men because Patricia had said, in the clean, precise voice of someone doing a risk assessment and not an emotional one, that the alternative was waiting another week for an independent security firm to be vetted and brought up to speed, and that a week was time Amara did not currently have to spend. Dante drove her there himself. She sat in the back of the car and he sat in the front passenger seat, and neither of them spoke for the first 6 minutes of the drive. The city moved past the windows. It was a gray morning, the kind Chicago made in October, where the sky and the buildings were nearly the same color, and the whole world looked like it was waiting for something to break. The Eastern District meeting, Amara said. The one you left last night. Dante turned his head slightly. Is there damage from that? She said. A pause. Potentially. How bad? He was quiet for a moment, which with Dante meant he was deciding how honest to be, rather than deciding what was true. She had learned to read that pause years ago. The Falcone family used the window, he said. They moved on 2 distribution corridors I'd been holding. It'll take resources to reclaim them. He paused again. And it may not be possible to reclaim them quietly. Meaning it could escalate, she said. Meaning it will escalate, he said. The question is how far. She looked out the window. You left that meeting for me, she said. Yes. And now there's going to be a war in your organization because of it. That's one way to frame it. Is there another way? He turned to look at her directly, which meant looking back over his shoulder, which was an awkward posture for a man his size in a moving car. And he did it anyway. The other way is that I made a choice about what mattered more, and I'm prepared to deal with what that choice costs. She looked at him. Don't make me responsible for that, she said quietly. Whatever it costs you, that's your consequence to carry. Not mine. I know, he said. I'm not putting it on you. I'm just answering the question you asked. She looked back out the window. Okay, she said. The car pulled up to the hotel. The room was clean and ordinary and smelled like fresh linen and the particular neutral non-scent of hotel cleaning products, which was more comforting than she'd expected. She sat on the edge of the bed and took her shoes off and looked at the carpet and breathed. Dante had come up to the room because she hadn't told him not to. An oversight she registered and decided to let stand because she was tired and the baby was pressing on her lower back with a specific insistence that had been building since the drive, and she didn't have the reserves to manage his presence and manage her discomfort simultaneously. She lay back on the bed, fully clothed. "I need to sleep," she said. "Okay, you don't have to stay. I know." She closed her eyes. She heard him move to the chair in the corner. Every hotel room, she had noticed, had a chair in the corner that nobody ever actually wanted to sit in. And yet, here was Dante Valeri, folding himself into one at 10:30 in the morning because she hadn't told him to leave. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke, he was gone. There was a bottle of water on the nightstand that hadn't been there before, and a text from him on her phone. "Nico will call if anything changes on the security situation. I'll be reachable." And then, after a gap, a second text that had been sent 20 minutes after the first. "You looked like you were actually sleeping. I didn't want to wake you to say goodbye." She stared at that second text for a long moment. Then she set the phone down and drank the water and called Patricia. The next 4 days had the compressed, strange quality of time, passing inside a container days that were full of activity and empty of movement, particular suspension of waiting for the next thing, while trying to keep the present thing stable. Amara worked through documents with Patricia by video call each morning. She walked the hotel corridor twice a day because she couldn't manage stairs comfortably anymore, and the corridor was flat and long enough to constitute movement. She talked to her mother in the evenings, careful conversations, partial truths, enough to let her mother know she was safe, without triggering the specific kind of maternal alarm that would have resulted in her mother appearing in Chicago from Atlanta with a suitcase and an agenda. She thought about what Nico had said. She thought about what Dante's second text had said. She thought about the rocking chair in the nursery of the mansion she'd left, and the scratch on the doorframe, and the wedding photo she'd turned face down, and the 6 years of a life that had been real, regardless of how it had ended. She thought about Elodie. Mostly, she thought about Elodie. On the 5th day, the situation with the Falcone family broke open. She found out the way she'd started finding out most things through Patricia, who had received information from Dante's attorney, who had been tasked with keeping Amara's legal team informed of any security developments. The message came through at 7 in the evening, and Patricia called immediately after sending it, which told Amara before she answered that the content was not routine. "There's been a significant confrontation," Patricia said, "between Dante's organization and the Falcone faction. It escalated this afternoon. 2 of Dante's men are in critical condition. One of the Falcone people is dead." Amara sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. "And Dante," she said. "He's not hurt," Patricia said. "He was present at the confrontation. He walked away." She exhaled. "There's more," Patricia said. "Tell me." "The confrontation happened because Dante received information this morning about the person inside his organization who had helped Serena move. The second facilitator, the one Nico hadn't fully identified yet." A pause. "It was Marco." The name hit her like a flat physical impact. Marco, who had driven her for 3 years, who had held the umbrella on the rainy night she'd left, who had carried her suitcase into Jess's brownstone without a word, who had said, "Call if you need anything." Mrs. Valeri in a voice she had read as genuine. "Marco," she said. "He had been providing Serena with your schedule for approximately 6 weeks," Patricia said. "Going back to before you discovered the affair. He knew your appointment times, your routes, the nights Dante was away from the mansion." Patricia's voice stayed clean and precise, in the way of someone delivering facts that carry enormous weight and knows that the delivery is part of what makes them bearable. "He was removed from the situation this afternoon. I don't have details beyond that." Amara pressed her hand flat against the blanket. 6 weeks. Marco had been feeding information to Serena for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, every time she'd sat in the back of that car talking on the phone, every time she'd told him a destination, every time she'd trusted the ordinary dailiness of a driver she'd seen every day for 3 years, it had been going through him. To Serena, to the people who had run her car off a road. She thought about the umbrella. She thought about call if you need anything. "Amara," Patricia said carefully. "Are you still with me?" "Yes," she said. "I'm here. I know it's a lot," Amara said. "I know. I'll process it." She put her hand on her stomach. "Is there a threat assessment?" With Marco out of the picture and Serena in custody, what's the current threat level? Briggs assessed it as significantly reduced, Patricia said. The Falcone confrontation also appears to have served as a deterrent. The message was received. A pause. You may be able to return to a more normal arrangement within the next few days. A longer-term residence rather than a hotel. Okay, Amara said. Let's talk tomorrow morning about what that looks like. Of course, she hung up. She sat in the hotel room alone, with the lamp on and the sounds of the city coming through the window she'd cracked open, because the recycled air had been making her head hurt, and she held absolutely still for a moment. The way you hold still when you've been hit and you're checking the inventory of what still works. Then she picked up her phone. She called Dante. He answered on the second ring. Amara. His voice was rough at the edges, in a way that told her more than whatever he was about to say. I heard about Marco, she said. Silence on his end. Then how much? She paused. Are you hurt? No. They're in surgery. The hospital says they expect both to make it. She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. I trusted him, she said. Marco. For 3 years. I talked to him. I told him things not about your organization, not about anything operational, just normal things. Normal conversation, because I thought he was someone who cared. She stopped. Was there anything real? Or was it all, I don't know, Dante said. I don't have that answer. I know you don't. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Dante, she said. What you did today, the confrontation. Was it... She searched for the word. Was it controlled? Or did you... It was controlled, he said. It was a message, not a massacre. I know the difference. I'm not sure I always knew that, she said. The difference between the two. A pause. I know, he said. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask the organization. The parts of it that exist because of violence, or the threat of it, or the specific quality of fear that your name generates. She breathed. Is any of that going to touch our daughter? When she's old enough to understand what it is. The silence on his end was different from his operational silences. This one had weight and texture. She could feel him thinking, not calculating, actually thinking. The way people think when a question has found something real. I've been asking myself that question for 9 months, he said. Since you told me you were pregnant, and I don't have an answer that satisfies me, he said. Which is the most honest thing I can tell you. She sat with that. I need it to satisfy me, she said, before she arrives. I need to know what world she's coming into. I know, he said. Then figure it out, she said, not harshly, not as an ultimatum. Just as a statement of fact, the way you state facts to someone you trust to hear them. Figure it out, Dante, because whatever happens between you and me, she's going to know your name. She's going to know who you are, and I need that to be something I can let her know. He didn't respond immediately. Okay, he said finally. Okay, she hung up. She went into labor on a Thursday. 38 weeks and 4 days, which the doctor had been cautiously optimistic about after the previous week's events, monitoring Amara's stress levels and blood pressure with the specific vigilance of someone who understood that the body keeps the score of everything its owner is trying not to show. It started at 4 in the morning, the particular low grinding pressure that she'd been told to expect, and that was somehow both exactly what she'd expected and entirely different from anything she'd actually experienced. She lay still for 20 minutes timing it, the way the book said to, and when the intervals were consistent, she got up and got dressed in the dark, and she called the one person she'd already established would be her labor support. Jess answered before the second ring. Time? Jess said. She'd been waiting for this call for 2 weeks. 7 minutes, Amara said. Consistent. I'm getting dressed. 20 minutes. Jess, I'm already getting dressed, Amara. Don't argue with me. She didn't argue. She called the hospital next. Then she called Patricia because Patricia had asked to be notified when labor started, and because there were documents pending that Patricia had wanted Amara to sign before the birth, if possible, and they had run out of time for that. Patricia did not sound surprised to receive a call at 4:15 in the morning. We'll handle the documents afterward, Patricia said immediately. Nothing changes legally based on the timing. Focus on yourself right now. Thank you. Call me when she's here. She hung up. She stood in the hotel room in her coat and her hospital bag over her shoulder, and she looked around the room, clean, neutral, anonymous, the room of someone passing through, and she breathed in once, all the way down. Then she picked up her phone one more time. She had not planned to call Dante. She had planned this part very carefully and very specifically, had thought through who she wanted in that hospital and in what capacity and what she needed that space to mean. And Dante had not been in that plan. She had known he would need to be told, had arranged through Patricia that Briggs would notify him once she was admitted, and she had told herself that was sufficient. She stood in the hotel room at 4:20 in the morning, and she looked at his name in her phone, and she thought about the chair that he'd sat in all night in a hospital room, and about a second text sent 20 minutes after the first, and about 38 weeks of carrying a person they had made together. She called him. He picked up before the first ring finished. "I'm in labor," she said. She heard him stand up. She heard it, the physical sound of a man moving from horizontal to vertical in a single motion, the rustling of a shift in position, and then nothing, because he was already moving. "Which hospital?" he said. "Mercy General, where they took me before." She paused. "I'm not asking you to come in. I'm not—" She stopped. Started again. "I don't want you in the delivery room. I need that to be mine. Jess is coming, but I thought you should know. Not through Briggs. From me. Thank you," he said. His voice was low and careful in the way of someone handling something they're afraid of dropping. "I'll have someone come out when she's here," she said. "Okay, Dante." She shifted the hospital bag on her shoulder. A contraction was building. She could feel the early edge of it, like weather coming. Whatever happens after this, whatever the next year looks like, she's going to be okay. I'm going to make sure she's okay. "I know," he said. "I know you will." She hung up. Jess knocked on the door 3 minutes later. Labor lasted 11 hours. This was in the range of normal for a first delivery, the midwife said, and Amara found this information both true and completely useless, because knowing something is statistically normal does not alter the experience of it in any meaningful way. 11 hours was 11 hours, and they were the longest, most physically consuming 11 hours of her life, and she spent them in a sequence of positions and states that she had read about and been told about and could not have genuinely understood until she was inside them. Jess stayed. Jess held her arm during contractions and talked to her about nothing about a podcast she'd been listening to, about the restaurant they'd gone to in college, that had inexplicably served every meal with a pickle on top, about the neighbor's dog that had sitting on Jess's porch step every afternoon for no reason anyone could explain. Normal. Ordinary. The texture of a friendship that had existed long enough to know that what a person needs in extremis is often not profundity, but just the sound of something familiar. Amara held on to that. In the spaces between contractions, she thought about Dante in the waiting room. She knew he was there. She hadn't needed to be told. She had known with the specific certainty of a woman who had spent 6 years learning a person completely, that the moment she'd hung up that phone call, he had been already in motion, and that whatever else happened, whatever cost he'd been running at, for the past several weeks, he would be in that building when his daughter arrived. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't have to know right now. At 3:17 in the afternoon, after a final 40 minutes of effort that restructured Amara's entire understanding of what her body was capable of, Elodie Grace Valeri arrived. She was 6 pounds 11 ounces, and she was furious. The crying started before she was fully in the midwife's hands, outraged, immediate, the crying of a person who had opinions about her circumstances and intended to make them known. Sound of it hit Amara somewhere below thought, somewhere below language, in a part of her that had not existed before that moment, and would exist for the rest of her life. "Here she is," the midwife said. "Here she is. Look at her." They put Elodie on Amara's chest. She was warm and heavy and terrible and perfect, and she was still crying, and Amara put both hands on her small back and felt the rise and fall of her breathing and the realness of her, the specific, implausible physical realness of a person who had not been in the world an hour ago. "Hi," Amara said. Her voice cracked on the single syllable. She hadn't cried in 5 weeks. She had managed and endured and decided and moved forward and held herself together with the precision of a woman who understood that falling apart was a luxury the situation didn't have room for. She had not cried since the elevator. She cried now, not from grief, or not only from grief, from something that included grief and fear and exhaustion, and the tremendous specific weight of a moment that had arrived after weeks of everything trying to prevent it. And that was here now, solid and breathing and present on her chest. Jess was crying too, silently, from the corner, the way people cry when they're trying to let the moment belong to someone else. She looks like you, Jess said. You said that already, Amara managed. It's still true. Amara looked at her daughter's face, the specific composed intensity of it, the furrowed concentration of someone taking stock of a new situation and reserving judgment, and she laughed and cried at the same time and held her close. 20 minutes later, she asked the nurse to let Dante know. He came to the doorway the way he'd come to the hospital room doorway, after the accident, standing at the threshold, not presuming entry, waiting for something he used to have automatic access to, and no longer did. He looked at Amara first, not at Elodie, at Amara, checking her face the way he'd always checked her face when something had happened, and he needed to know the shape of it before he could respond to anything else. She nodded at him. He came in. He stopped at the foot of the bed. His eyes moved to Elodie, who was sleeping against Amara's chest with the absolute total commitment of a person who has decided that sleep is currently the correct response to existence. His face did something that had no name, not softened. That was too simple a word for what happened. It was more like all the architecture of it, the control and the calculation and the specific quality of watchful intelligence that Dante Valeri had worn on his face. For as long as Amara had known him, all of it simply moved aside. Without effort, without decision, just moved, the way furniture moves when something larger enters the room. He stood there at the foot of the bed and looked at his daughter, and he was entirely undone. He didn't speak for a long time. Jess, who had the profound social intelligence of a woman who knew when she was not needed, gathered her bag quietly from the chair and touched Amara's arm once as she passed and slipped out the door. Dante hadn't even noticed. She's so small, he said finally. His voice was not the voice she'd heard in operating mode, or in the hallway at 3 a.m, or in the hotel room when he'd told her about Marco. It was a voice she could count on one hand the times she'd heard undefended, unmanaged, the voice of a person who has stopped performing and arrived somewhere true. She's not actually that small, Amara said. She's almost 7 pounds. She looks small to me. You're enormous. Everyone looks small to you. He exhaled, something between a sound and a laugh, and it broke the tension of the room slightly, like a window opening. Can I? He stopped. Yes, Amara said. He moved to the side of the bed slowly with the specific careful movement of a very large man, trying not to disturb something fragile. He looked at Elodie for a long moment. Then he put one hand gently, with the precision of someone touching something they can't afford to mishandle against his daughter's back. Elodie stirred slightly, made a small sound settled. Dante's hand stayed. Amara watched him. She watched this man who could silence rooms and had enemies who planned in advance how to use the people he loved. This man who had broken her in the specific way that only people we have trusted completely can break us. This man who had driven alone to a brownstone and stood on a sidewalk and sat in hospital chairs and sent a second text in 20 minutes. After the first, she watched him, standing at the side of her bed with his hand on their daughter's back and his face entirely open. And she felt something she had no interest in naming yet, something she was going to put back in that compartment and close the door on for now. I need to tell you something, Dante said. He didn't look up from Elodie. Okay, I spent the last 11 hours in that waiting room thinking about what you asked me. He paused. On the phone. About what world she's coming into. What my name is going to mean to her. Amara waited. I don't have it fully worked out, he said. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I've solved something that took me 20 years to build. But I've been talking to my attorney about the legitimate holdings, about what a transition looks like, about what it would take to... He stopped, as if hearing himself, as if checking the words against something. "I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I want you to know that. I'm not doing it to win you back. I don't think I have a right to try to win you back." She looked at him. "Then why?" she said. He finally looked up from Elodie. His eyes met hers, and they were the eyes she had loved, and the eyes she had stopped trusting, and the eyes of a man who was trying, in the specific, imperfect way of people who have failed at something important, to become someone worth trusting again. "Because she's going to know my name," he said, "and I want it to mean something she doesn't have to be afraid of." Amara held her daughter. The monitor beeped softly. Outside the window, Chicago moved in its ordinary, indifferent way. And somewhere under the surface of the room, under the quiet and the exhaustion and the fragile, suspended peace of a moment that couldn't hold its shape forever, something was building, the particular pressure of everything that had been between them, everything that had been broken and survived and endured, everything that had not been resolved and could not be resolved tonight, pressing toward a reckoning that was coming whether they were ready for it. Or ready for it, they were not. Dante left the hospital at 9 that evening. He didn't ask to stay. He had held Elodie for 11 minutes. Amara had counted, not deliberately. Just in the way that you count things when your attention has nowhere else to land, and then he had handed her back with the specific careful movement of someone, returning something that doesn't belong to them, and he had looked at Amara and said he would be in touch through Patricia about whatever she needed, and he had walked out. She had watched the door close behind him. She had expected to feel something clean about that, relief, or the particular satisfaction of a boundary holding. Instead, she felt the complicated thing she'd been feeling for weeks, the thing she kept putting in the compartment, and closing the door on, pressing against the inside of the door with a little more force than usual. She looked down at Elodie. Elodie was asleep, and had been asleep since approximately 2 minutes after Dante's hand had settled on her back, which Amara was choosing to read as coincidence, and not as any kind of statement by her 11-hour-old daughter about what she found comforting. "Don't start," Amara told her. Elodie slept. The first weeks with a newborn reorganized everything. Amara had known this, intellectually had read the books, had talked to friends who'd been through it, had understood, in the abstract, that a new baby dismantled your relationship with time and sleep and your own body in ways that were difficult to fully anticipate. What she had not fully understood was how completely those weeks would dwarf everything else. The divorce proceedings, the security situation, the complicated emotional archaeology of her marriage, all of it continued, technically, Patricia sending documents, and Briggs sending threat assessments, and Dante's attorney communicating through proper channels, but all of it existed in the background now, behind the immediate, demanding, overwhelming fact of Elodie. Elodie, who was hungry constantly. Elodie, who had her father's exact jaw and her mother's exact expression of composed suspicion, and who cried at 2 and 4, and sometimes at 2:15 and 4:10 as a variation, as if keeping Amara slightly off rhythm was a developmental priority. Elodie, who smelled like something Amara had no language for, and who slept sometimes in the crook of Amara's arm in the early morning, in a way that made the previous several weeks feel simultaneously very far away and very close, depending on which direction Amara chose to look. She had moved out of the hotel after 5 days. Patricia had arranged a furnished apartment in Lincoln Square, nothing to do with Dante's networks, leased through a management company. Patricia had used for other clients. Second floor, good light, a small room that Amara turned into a nursery with a rented crib and the white oak mobile she'd had shipped from the mansion because she'd bought it herself, and it was hers. The rocking chair was already there. She had not asked for it. It had appeared while she was still in the hospital, assembled and positioned in the corner of the small room, with no note and no message, and no acknowledgement from anyone in Dante's organization. She had stood in the doorway of the nursery when she'd first arrived and looked at it for a long time. Then she had sat in it and fed her daughter and let the room be quiet. She didn't call Dante about the chair. She didn't tell Patricia about it. She filed it in the compartment and closed the door. He came for his first visit when Elodie was 12 days old. Amara had agreed to supervised visits initially, Not supervised in the legal sense of someone else present to monitor, but supervised in the sense of arranged in advance, time-limited, and conducted in her space, on her terms. Patricia had drawn up the preliminary agreement. Dante's attorney had signed it within 6 hours of receiving it, which Patricia had noted without comment. He arrived at 10 in the morning, which was what they'd agreed, and he knocked, which was what Amara had asked. And she opened the door, and for a moment they stood on either side of the threshold in the particular silence of people who have too much accumulated history to start anywhere obvious. He had a bag. She looked at it. "Things for her," he said. "I didn't know what you needed. I had someone I tried to think about what would be practical." He paused. "There's a white noise machine, and formula, a few different kinds, in case you needed options. And a thing that is apparently a swaddle, but looked like a very technical piece of engineering to me personally." She stepped back from the door. He came in. He was careful in the apartment, the way he'd been careful in the hospital, moving without not his touching some presumption, keeping himself contained, wasn't been the portion of the space that had been extended to him. She watched him look around the living room, taking it in, and she watched the moment when his eyes found the hallway leading to the nursery, and then came back to her. "She's in there," Amara said. "She just went down. She'll probably be awake in 20 minutes. "I can wait," he said. She sat on the couch. He sat in the armchair across from it, which put 3 feet of coffee table and 5 weeks of accumulated damage between them. She put her hands in her lap. They were quiet for a moment. "How are you doing?" he said. "Tired," she said honestly. She doesn't believe in sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch. "I've started negotiating with her. This is not working." Something moved in his face. "I'm managing," she said. "Jess comes 3 days a week. My mother is coming at the end of the month. She paused. "I'm not going to pretend it's easy, because it isn't, but it's also..." She looked at the hallway. "She's worth it. That's not even a question." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." A sound came from the nursery. Small, preliminary, not quite a cry, more like a sound of reconsidering sleep. Dante looked at the hallway with an expression Amara recognized from the hospital room, that look of a man who has had everything he thought was important reorganized by 11 pounds of sleeping person. "Go ahead," Amara said. He stood. He went down the hallway slowly, and she listened to his footsteps stop at the nursery door and then go quiet. She didn't get up. She sat on the couch and put her head back and closed her eyes for the 45 seconds she had before Elodie's sounds escalated from reconsidering to decided. She heard Dante's voice from the nursery, very low. She couldn't make out words, just the tone, which was nothing like any tone she'd heard from him before. Not operational, not controlled. Something unguarded and direct, the way people talk when they've accepted that the person they're talking to has no agenda and requires no performance. Talking to his daughter, she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She was not going to do this. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Elodie's birth. Patricia presented it to Amara on a Tuesday morning over video call, walking through the final settlement terms with the clean precision that Amara had come to rely on financial provisions, custody arrangements, the formal legal architecture of a life being reorganized. Dante had accepted every condition Amara had requested. The settlement was, Patricia said, more than generous, which was the professional way of saying that Dante had not fought for a single thing except access to his daughter. He had gotten that. Liberal visitation, clearly defined, consistent, and protected. Amara had not contested it. She had never intended to contest it, because whatever Dante had failed to be to her, she had watched him with Elodie enough times in 4 months to know what he was to his daughter, and she was not going to use a child as punishment for what a husband had done. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked, after walking through the final page. Amara looked at the document on her screen. "Like it's real now," she said. "It's been real," Patricia said, not unkindly. "I know. But this is the part where it has a number and a date and a signature." She looked at her own name at the bottom of the screen. "There's a difference between knowing something and seeing it written down." "Take the weekend," Patricia said. "Sign it Monday. You don't have to rush the last step." She signed it Friday. The thing about building a life, Amara found, was that it didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive as a moment, no particular morning, when you woke up and felt the structure solidify beneath you, no single day when you could say here, this is where it started to become something real. It accumulated, quietly, in the kind of increments that were invisible until you turned around and measured the distance and were surprised by how far from where you'd started you'd managed to get. She got a job. This surprised people more than she'd expected. The women in her mother's group she'd found through a pediatric clinic recommendation, the couple from the floor below who had started saying hello in the hallway, even Jess, who knew better than to be surprised by anything Amara did, and was surprised anyway. She had spent 6 years not working. Not because she'd been told not to, not because Dante had asked it of her, but because the life they'd built had absorbed everything: the management of the household, the social navigation of his world, the emotional labor of loving someone whose professional life was built on things she couldn't acknowledge publicly. She had told herself it was a choice. She had told herself, when she was being more honest, that it was a drift, a long, slow current she'd moved with, because it had been easier than swimming against it. The job was with a nonprofit that provided legal navigation services to women in domestic transitions. She had found them through Patricia, who sat on their board. The role was not glamorous. She would be coordinating case intake, working with attorneys and social workers, and the particular specific chaos of an underfunded organization doing necessary work, but it was concrete and purposeful, and it got her out of the apartment 3 days a week with somewhere to be that was entirely her own. She told Dante about it on a Wednesday when he came for his visit, because it affected the schedule, and the schedule was something they communicated about directly now, without attorneys, in the practical, efficient manner of 2 adults who had accepted that they were going to be in each other's lives for the foreseeable future and had decided to make that workable. They had gotten good at workable. It was not easy. She wanted to be honest about that with herself, if not with anyone else. There was nothing easy about sitting across from someone who had been the center of your daily life for 6 years and managing the distance between you with the careful deliberateness of people handling. Something that could still, if mishandled, cause damage. She felt the distance. She maintained it with intention. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes in the particular unguarded moments that arrived without warning. She felt the weight of what was on the other side of it. She didn't act on that. She had been very clear with herself about the distinction between feeling something and acting on it. Elodie's first word was "da." Amara was feeding her lunch when it happened, a Tuesday in October. Elodie, 14 months old, sitting in her high chair with sweet potato on her chin and her hands, because she had recently decided that utensils were for people with less confidence than herself. She looked at the empty kitchen doorway and said "da" with great conviction, as if addressing someone she fully expected to materialize. Amara sat very still. "Da," Elodie said again. "Is that so?" Amara said carefully. Elodie looked at her with the expression of someone who considers the response inadequate. When Dante came that afternoon, Elodie produced the word again immediately, and with visible satisfaction, reaching her arms toward him with the specific imperious energy she had apparently reserved for this purpose. Dante picked her up and looked at Amara over Elodie's head with an expression that he was visibly trying to keep neutral and failing at comprehensively. "She said it this morning," Amara said. "I'm choosing to feel fine about it." "You don't have to." "I'm choosing," Amara said. "Let me choose." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. "She'll say Ma next week. My mother has been coaching her." "Through the phone?" "My mother could coach a congressional hearing through a phone," Amara said. "Elodie doesn't stand a chance." He laughed. Not the managed laugh she'd heard from him in professional settings over the years, not the polite social register of a man performing ease. A real laugh, genuine and slightly surprised by itself, the laugh of someone who had not laughed in a while and found it arriving unexpectedly. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went to start dinner, because the moment needed somewhere to go. That wasn't where it might otherwise go if she stood there looking at him. The conversation happened in January. Elodie was 15 months old. It was a Sunday, which had become their informal day visits that had started formally scheduled and bounded, and had gradually acquired the texture of something more ordinary. He would come at noon. Amara would usually be putting Elodie down for a nap, and they would end up sitting in the kitchen in the interim with coffee, talking about Elodie, mostly and occasionally about other things. It had started happening, the other things. She had noticed it a month ago and had not said anything about it, the way you don't say anything about a thing you're not sure you want to address, because addressing it makes it real in a way that then requires a response. That Sunday he arrived with a folder. She recognized that folder. Not the specific one, but the type, the thick manila kind that appeared in Dante's hands when something had reached a stage of completion that he wanted to present formally. She had seen that folder 100 times over 6 years, always in the context of something being finalized, something being handed over with the expectation of a response. "What is that?" she said. He set it on the kitchen table. "The organization," he said. "The transition. I told you I was working on it. I wanted you to see what it actually looks like." She looked at the folder. "Dante, not for your approval," he said quickly. "You don't have to approve it. You don't have to respond to it at all." I just stopped, sat down across from her, set his hands flat on the table. "I told you I would figure it out, and I have figured it out. And I wanted you to see it because you're the person I told I would do it, and I think you deserve to see that it's not," he paused, "that it's not just words." She looked at him. Then she looked at the folder. She opened it. It took her 20 minutes to read through it, during which Dante sat across from her and drank his coffee, and didn't speak. She read slowly, the way she read things that mattered, not looking for reassurance, but looking for the specific weight-bearing places, the parts that were real versus the parts that were framework, the commitments that were documented versus the intentions that were still contingent. There was a lot of it. The conversion of 6 legitimate business entities into independently operated holdings, with management structures that removed Dante from operational control. The documentation of a formal exit from 3 revenue streams that had never, in any paperwork Amara had ever seen, been labeled with their actual nature. A partnership with a federal compliance attorney who specialized in organizational restructuring, the kind of attorney you hire when you mean it, not when you want to appear to mean it, because the billing rate alone was a form of commitment. And at the back, a single page, a trust document established in Elodie's name, funded entirely from the legitimate holdings, managed independently with Patricia's firm listed as the legal administrator. Amara sat with that last page for a moment. "The trust," she said. "It's hers," he said. "Not mine. Not yours, not to manage, not to control. Hers, when she's 25. He paused. "I know that's not. I know money doesn't address the actual question. But I wanted her to have something that was clean. Something from me that had nothing attached to it." Amara looked at the page. "This is real," she said. "Yes. This is not..." She looked up at him. "This is not you showing me a plan. This is you having executed most of it already. The trust is complete," he said. "The business conversions are at various stages, some finished, some in process. The 3 revenue streams are gone. That's done." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to tell you it's over, because the cleanup takes years, and I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. But I'm in it. I'm not standing at the edge of it, deciding. I'm in it." She closed the folder. She set her hands on top of it. She looked at him for a long moment, this man she had loved and been broken by, and left and co-parented alongside, and had coffee with on Sunday mornings, and had not, despite everything, managed to stop knowing with the specific intimate precision of someone who had spent 6 years learning every angle of him. "Why are you showing me this now?" she said. He was quiet. "Dante, because I don't want to keep..." He stopped. His hands pressed flat against the table. "Because every Sunday I come here, and I sit in that chair and we talk about Elodie, and occasionally about other things. And I go home and I think about what I'm not saying, someone, and I have been telling myself for months that not saying it is the right thing. That you've been through enough, that I don't have the right." He looked at her directly. "And all of that is true. And I'm still running out of the ability to not say it." "Say what?" she said. He looked at her. "That I don't want to keep coming here on Sundays and leaving. he said. That I understand completely why we're where we are, and I accept every consequence of what I did. That I'm not asking you to forgive me on a schedule, or feel anything you don't feel, or pretend that what happened didn't happen. He paused. I'm saying that I see you. Every Sunday I see you, and I see what you've built, and I see who you are right now versus who you were when I was too arrogant to understand what I had. His voice changed register slightly, became something less controlled and therefore real. I'm in love with you. I don't say that to pressure you. I say it because I'm tired of acting like it isn't true. The kitchen was very quiet. From down the hall, the soft sound of Elodie shifting in her crib, settling, staying asleep. Amara looked at him. She thought about the elevator. She thought about the ring on the desk and the way her feet had found the floor and carried her out of that building and into a rain-wet car and away. She thought about a hotel room at 3 a.m. and blood on a sleeve and a second text sent 20 minutes after the first. She thought about a rocking chair that had appeared assembled and positioned in the corner of a room she'd been moving into, with no note and no acknowledgement, and which she had sat in every night for 15 months. She thought about what it had cost her to leave, and she thought about what it would cost her to stay left. Those were not the same calculation. She had known that for a while. She had kept it in the compartment. I need you to understand something, she said. He waited. I spent 6 years making myself smaller to fit inside the life you built, she said. Not because you asked me to. You didn't ask me to. But I did it anyway, because the life was large and complicated, and I didn't want to add to the weight of it, and I loved you enough to keep finding new ways to fit. She pressed her hands together on top of the folder. I'm not doing that again. If anything, if we ever talked about anything, I would need to be the full size of myself. All the parts you found inconvenient, and all the parts that pushed back, and all the parts that were watching and noticing things and not saying them, because I didn't want to add to your stress. She held his eyes. I'm not going back to managing myself around you. I know, he said. That's not enough, she said. Knowing isn't the same as... I know, he said again, and then stopped her from finishing. Amara, I know knowing isn't the same. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. He gestured slightly at the folder between them. I'm asking you to watch, the way you've been watching. And if what you see over the next year, 2 years, however long you need, if it doesn't match what I'm telling you, then it doesn't match. And I'll accept that. He paused. But I needed you to know that I'm not... He stopped. I'm not coming here on Sundays just to see Elodie. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. He went very still. I've known for a couple of months, she said. I wasn't ready to have this conversation. Are you ready now? She thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. I think I'm ready to stop pretending I'm not having it internally. She looked down at the folder. That's not the same as an answer. I'll take it, he said quietly. You should know, she said, that there's still a part of me that is genuinely, legitimately angry. Not hot angry, cold angry. The kind that lives in your chest and doesn't go away. It just becomes part of the furniture. I carry it. She looked at him. And I don't know if that goes away. I don't know if I'm the kind of person who can love someone and also carry that and not have the carrying eventually. She stopped. I don't know. I know you don't, he said. I don't know either. He looked at his hands. What I know is that I would rather spend whatever time it takes finding out, with you telling me exactly when the carrying becomes too heavy, than spend it not knowing, because we never tried. She was quiet. That's different from the Dante I married, she said. Yes, he said. I know. How do I know it stays different? He looked at her directly. You don't, he said. I can't give you that. Nobody can give you that. What I can give you is the folder and the Sundays. And ever you tell me something is wrong, I will hear it instead of managing it. But the guarantee, he shook his head. There isn't one. There never was. I just used to be arrogant enough to pretend otherwise. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was a thing she had done a great deal in the past year, in hospital rooms and hotel rooms and apartments, and the chairs of her life looking up, as if the ceiling might offer something useful, which it never did, but which gave her a moment of not having to look at anything that needed looking at. I'm not moving back in with you, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm not going to, she stopped. Started again. Whatever this is or becomes, it would be slow. Slower than you want it to be. And I would need to be the one setting the pace. And I would need you to not make me feel bad about whatever pace I set. Yes, he said. And the first time I feel managed, she said, the first time I say something difficult and it's being sorted and handled instead of heard, I'm telling you. And if it doesn't change, I'm done. Not dramatically, just done. Yes, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. I've watched you mean things for 15 months. I know what it looks like when you mean something. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at very few things in her life, with the specific, complicated attention of someone who has been burned by a thing and is standing close to it again anyway. Not because they've forgotten that fire burns, but because they've decided that the cold on the other side of the distance is also a cost. And they've finally, carefully added it up. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again. We'll see. He didn't smile. She appreciated that. A smile would have been the wrong register, too celebratory, too final, claiming something that hadn't been given. He just held her gaze, and she held his, and between them was everything that had ever been between them. The broken things and the real things, and the things that had been real even when everything else had been breaking. Down the hall, Elodie woke up. The sound of it was decisive, the particular cry of a 14-month-old who has decided that nap time was sufficient, and the afternoon had other plans. Amara pushed her chair back and stood, and Dante stood automatically when she did, and for a moment they were both standing in the kitchen, in the ordinary afternoon light, with the sound of their daughter down the hall, and the distance between them measured in something smaller than it had been. I'll get her, Amara said. She walked down the hall. She lifted Elodie from the crib, warm and slightly damp and faintly indignant in the way that Elodie was always faintly indignant about the transition from sleep, and held her against her chest and stood in the nursery in the afternoon light, with her daughter's weight solid and real against her. She looked at the rocking chair. She had never told him. She knew he'd had it assembled. She had never called about the flowers either. The ones that had appeared on the small table in the hospital room after she'd been discharged the second time. She had filed these things without acknowledgement, telling herself it was appropriate distance, telling herself she was not going to be moved by gestures from a man who had hurt her. The truth was, she had been moved. She had been moved and had chosen not to follow the movement because the direction it pointed required more from her than she'd had available at the time. She didn't know yet whether she had it now. She knew she had more than she'd had a year ago. That was something. She carried Elodie back to the kitchen. Dante was standing at the counter, having apparently decided that standing was more appropriate than sitting, and he turned when he heard them, and the look on his face when he saw Elodie was the look Amara marked filing and not examining too closely. Hi, he said to Elodie. Elodie reached for him immediately with the total unself-conscious confidence of a person who has not yet learned to protect herself from wanting things. Amara handed her over. She stood with her arms empty for a moment, watching him hold his daughter, watching Elodie grip the front of his shirt in her small fist and look up at him with the specific expression that she saved for the people she had decided were hers. She knows, Amara said. Dante looked up. Who belongs to her, Amara said. She's known since the beginning. I used to think it was just she stopped. She knows. He looked at Elodie, who had by now made herself comfortable against his chest with the authority of someone who has claimed a territory. Yeah, he said quietly. I think she does. 6 months after that Sunday in the kitchen, Amara and Dante had dinner together for the first time. Not at his house. Not at hers. A restaurant, a quiet one. Not the kind he would have chosen in the life they'd had before, where the entrance had been guarded and the staff had known his name, and every table had offered him a full view of the room. A small place in Andersonville with good food, and a host who treated them like any two people, which was what Amara had asked for when she'd chosen it, and which had felt important. They sat across from each other with menus. She ordered first, which she had not always done. He ordered without looking at her for confirmation, which he had not always done either. Small things. She had learned that it was the small things you had to watch. They talked about Elodie for the first 15 minutes, which was partly habit and partly genuine, and partly the comfortable bridge between them that always worked. Then they talked about Amara's work, a case she was following, that had turned unexpectedly complicated. A woman her organization was trying to help navigate a situation that made Amara's own history look simple. Dante listened. He asked two specific questions that were not about solution or management. Questions that were just about what she'd observed. What she thought. She had not quite answered questions about her work. Before dinner, it had felt too much like claiming a kind of normalcy she wasn't ready to claim. It felt different tonight. She didn't examine why. "How is the Eastern District situation?" she asked, because she had been wanting to ask for 6 months and had been choosing not to because it had felt like the wrong kind of involvement, and tonight she was testing where the line was. He looked at her. "You want to know about that? I want to know about your life," she said. "The real parts, not the arranged parts." He was quiet for a moment. "The Falcone situation stabilized. It cost more than I'd have liked, but the terms are clear now. The exit from the 3 revenue streams created friction. I'd underestimated how much of the Eastern network was connected to those lines. Some relationships ended." He turned his fork over. "Some of them were relationships I'd been managing for 15 years. "How does that feel?" she said. He looked at her. "Like something I should have done 10 years ago," he said. She nodded. "And how does it actually feel?" she said. A pause. "Like losing weight you didn't know you were carrying," he said. "And also like losing something familiar, both at the same time." "That's honest," she said. "You asked," he said. "I did," she said. "I'm going to keep asking." "I know," he said. "Good." The first birthday party for Elodie was held on a warm Saturday in late September, in the backyard of a house. Amara had rented not the Lincoln Square apartment, which she'd outgrown in the logistical sense of needing more room than one bedroom provided when a small person was involved, but a house in Roscoe Village, with a backyard that had a mulberry tree and a gate that closed properly, which was what she'd told the real estate agent she needed, and which had been more difficult to find than she'd expected. She had moved in with Dante. She had not been ready for that. She did not know when she would be ready for that, or whether ready was even the right frame, whether it was something you arrived at, or something you decided despite the absence of arrival. She and Dante had had dinner 6 more times since Andersonville. Twice with Elodie, 4 times without. She had been to his house twice not to stay, but to see the changes he'd been making, the specific and tangible changes that mapped to the folder on her kitchen table, the parts of his life that were being reorganized into something his daughter would not have to fear. She had stood in rooms she'd once known and found them different, and had not known whether the difference was in the rooms or in her. Both, probably. The birthday party had 12 children, and their parents, and Jess and Amara's mother, who had arrived from Atlanta 2 days earlier, and who had been watching Dante with the specific vigilance of a woman who had heard everything and was not going to issue any verdict until she had observed for herself what kind of man he was now. She had observed. She had not yet issued the verdict. She was sitting in the backyard with a cup of coffee, watching Dante navigate the demands of 11 toddlers and one Elodie with the same focused attention he had brought to everything else in his life. And her expression was the expression of someone updating a calculation. Amara sat beside her. He assembled a baby gate wrong, and then wouldn't admit it. "For 20 minutes, her mother said. "I know. He's been watching you all afternoon, Mama." Not in a bad way. And her mother paused. "In the way your father used to watch me when he'd done something stupid and was trying to figure out if we were still okay." Amara looked at her mother. "Are you comparing those 2 men?" "I'm saying I recognize the look," her mother said. "I'm not saying anything else." Amara looked at the backyard. Elodie was standing at the edge of the grass, holding onto the post of the pergola with both hands, concentrating on her feet with the expression of someone attempting a technical problem. Dante was 3 feet behind her, not hovering, not reaching, just positioned available if she needed him, out of the way if she didn't. He had learned that. She had watched him learn it. He caught her looking. He didn't do anything with it, no smile, no gesture. just held her gaze for a moment, and then looked back at Elodie. She looked back at her mother. "He hurt me," she said. Not as a revelation, because her mother knew all of it, but as a statement that needed to live in the air between them sometimes, needed to be said out loud periodically, so it didn't calcify into something. Amara stopped acknowledging. "I know, baby," her mother said. "And I'm still." She stopped. Watched her daughter take one uncertain step along the pergola post. "I'm still figuring out what I'm doing." "That's okay." "Is it?" Her mother looked at her. "You walked away from that man when you were 8 months pregnant," her mother said. "You built this." She gestured at the backyard, at the house, at the 12 children and the mulberry tree and the gate that closed properly. All of this from almost nothing in a little over a year. You did not need saving. You did not need someone to come put you back together. She set down her coffee cup. So whatever you're figuring it out from a standing position. That's the difference. You're not deciding from her. You're deciding from here. Amara sat with that. From here. She looked at the backyard. Elodie had taken 3 steps now, small and definite, along the length of the pergola post, and had stopped to consider the open grass between her current position and Dante's, and was looking at it with the expression of someone who had done the calculation and was deciding whether the risk was worth it. "Elodie," Dante said quietly. She looked at him. He spread his hands. Not reaching, just open, available. The gesture of a man who understood that you did not go toward someone who was deciding. You made yourself reachable and you waited. Elodie let go of the post. She took 4 steps across the open grass, uneven and effortful, each one a small act of commitment, and she reached Dante and grabbed the front of his shirt with both fists and stayed there, and he put his hands on her back and held her while she got her balance. "There she is," he said quietly. Amara felt something move through her chest. Not a resolution, not the arrival of certainty, just movement, the way things move in your chest, when you've been holding them still for a long time, and something shifts and lets them be in motion again. She didn't say anything to her mother. Her mother didn't say anything to her. They sat together in the warm afternoon light and watched Elodie find her footing. Later, after the guests had gone, and her mother was inside with Elodie, and the particular quiet of an afternoon winding down had settled over the backyard, Amara found Dante in the kitchen, washing cake plates because she hadn't asked him to, and he'd done it anyway. She leaned against the doorframe. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. He didn't stop. She watched him for a moment. "She walked," Amara said, "today, across the grass to you." He turned off the water, turned around. "I saw," he said. "She's been doing it more," Amara said. "Walking. She's more confident than she was even a week ago. Every day she goes a little further before she looks back to check if someone's there." He looked at her. She looked at him. "That's what I want," she said. "That's what I want it to look like. Both of us being people she can walk toward without being afraid. And also," she paused, "being people who can walk toward each other without being afraid." He was very still. "I'm not saying tomorrow," she said. "I'm not saying I know what it looks like. I'm saying I'm still in the figuring out, and I'm not trying to figure my way to a specific answer. I'm just..." She pressed her lips together. "I'm still here, after everything. I'm still here, and I don't think that means nothing." "It doesn't mean nothing," he said. "No," she said. "It doesn't." She pushed off the door frame and came into the kitchen and stood beside him at the counter, and looked at the clean plates drying in the rack, and he stood beside her and looked at the plates, and neither of them touched the other, because it was not yet a night for that. But the distance had changed, not eliminated, changed. Measured in something different now, not damage and protection, not the deliberate maintenance of a woman, making sure she stayed the full size of herself, but something more like the ordinary space between 2 people standing next to each other and deciding one ordinary afternoon at a time whether to close it. Outside the mulberry tree dropped a leaf in the September air. Elodie's laugh came from inside the house, high and absolute, the laugh of a child who has found something funny and sees no reason to keep it to herself. Amara and Dante both turned toward the sound at the same moment. They looked at each other, and for the first time in a very long time, not without cost, not without everything that had been broken still carrying its weight somewhere between them. Not with the blind confidence of people who believed love was enough to make things simple. They were in the same direction, toward whatever came next, together or not, toward Elodie, toward the ordinary, imperfect, still standing fact of a life that had survived what it had not been supposed to survive. Amara turned back to the window. The light was going gold. She had learned in hospitals and hotel rooms and lawyers' offices and a backyard with a mulberry tree that the fight worth fighting was not always the one that looked like a fight. Sometimes it was the one that looked like simply staying upright, simply refusing to become someone diminished by what had been done to her, simply putting one foot in front of the other day after day in the direction of the life she had decided she deserved. She had fought that fight. She had won it, not with rage, not with theater, not with ultimatums she would have had to follow through on or abandon, but with the specific, exhausting, largely invisible courage of a woman who had known when to leave and had left, and had known what to build and had built it, and had known what she was worth and had refused to negotiate on it, even when the negotiation would have been easier. She was Amara, not a wife, not a discarded woman, not a lesson learned or a consequence carried. Just Amara, 32 years old, still figuring it out, standing in a kitchen that was hers, on a street that was hers, in a life that was hers, with her daughter's laugh coming through the walls, and the September light going gold in the window, and a man at the counter beside her, who had failed her in the specific way that only the people we love most can fail us, and who was trying now with the particular imperfect seriousness of a person who has finally understood what trying actually requires. She did not know what came next. She had learned to be at peace with not knowing. What she knew was this: she had been in the elevator. She had put the ring on the desk. She had walked away in the rain with her hand on her stomach and her prenatal records in a manila folder and a destination she was building as she went. She had done that. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and she had done it. And the woman who had done it was standing here now on the other side of it, not broken, not hardened, not diminished. Still standing, still choosing, still exactly the full size of herself. She looked at the gold light in the window and she breathed, and she let the afternoon be what it was, imperfect, unresolved, quietly beginning, and entirely her own.